Hello everyone and welcome back to PHPRunner Tips and Tricks. Before we get started, just a quick reminder, you can support the channel by becoming a member for as little as $1 per month. Your support helps me keep creating these tutorials. A big thank you to R. Sandford 100 and Fajar I for becoming members recently. Your support means a lot. Alright, let's jump straight into today's topic, field spinners. Now you might be wondering what exactly is a field spinner. Well, let me show you with a quick demonstration. If you've never seen or used one before, this will give you a clear idea of how it works and why it is useful. Alright, let's start fresh with a brand new project. I want to show you just how quickly you can create a project from scratch in PHPRunner. I'll call this project Field Spinner and then click Create. Next, it's going to ask me to connect to a database. I'll select one of the databases I already have set up. From that database, I only need the products table. Now I'll keep the default settings for list, add and delete pages. That's perfect for this demo. Let's move to the add page and specifically to the units in stock field. I'll double click on that field and change the HTML5 input type to number. Once that is done, I'll save the project and build it. Now let's test it. I'll open the project in the browser, go to Products and click Add New. And there it is. The unit in stock field now set up as a number input. When I hover my mouse over the field, you'll notice small up and down arrows appear. That's called a field spinner. By default, I can even spin in negative numbers like -47 and so on. That's how a basic field spinner works. But what if we want to control the range of values, for example, setting a minimum and maximum so users can't spin anything outside that range? Now this is something I actually picked up in the Dev Club. If you're not a member yet, I highly recommend joining. It is definitely worth it. We cover a lot of practical tips and tricks there. So let's look at how to set a minimum and maximum using jQuery. On the JavaScript OnLoad event of the add page, I'll add the following code. What this does is it looks for any input field where the ID starts with value underscore units in stock. Then it applies two attributes. Min is set to 10 and max is set to 20. This way the spinner will only allow values between 10 and 20. Alright, let's go ahead and save the changes, then build the project again. Now I'm going to open this in the browser. On the add page, if I use the spinner to scroll up, it starts at 10 and goes all the way up to 20, but no further. If I scroll down, it stops at 10, since that is the minimum we set. So that part is working exactly as expected. But here's the problem. The user can still type in any number manually. For example, if I type in 50 and save the record, it still gets saved. And if we look at the listing page, you'll see that 50 is right there. That's not what we want. Ideally, we want to force the field to only accept values between 10 and 20, without letting the user override it by typing something else. So in the next step, I'm going to show you how to fix that. There are actually two ways to handle this. In this video, I'll cover the first method, and then in a follow-up live stream, I'll show you the second method once I've worked it out. Alright, I'm going to remove the jQuery code we added earlier because I have a better approach that I'll show you now. We're going to use the before process event. Inside this event, the first thing I'll need is the table name, which is available in a global variable. Next, I'm going to create a PHP array. I call this array minimum maximum. In this array, I'll store 4 things: the minimum value, the maximum value, the table name coming from the global variable, and the field name that I want to validate. In this case, the field we're working with is unit in stock, which is the actual field name in the database. Oh, and before I forget, let's quickly go back to the page designer. For the units in stock field, I'll switch it from a number field back to a text field. Alright, let's head back into the events on the add page. We're getting close to the finish line here. Now watch closely. What I'm going to do is take the array we just built and store it inside a session variable. I'll call this session variable field spinner, and inside it I'm placing the min-max array we populated earlier. But that's not all. I also want to set up a proxy variable. Think of this as a little bridge between our PHP and JavaScript. We'll be using this proxy value later on in the JavaScript OnLoad event to make everything work seamlessly on the page. So at this point, the block of code is finished. Let's recap visually. First, we created the array with everything we need. Next, we stored that array into a session variable. And finally, we set a proxy value called field spinner, which will come into play in a few steps. In just a moment, you'll see exactly how this proxy variable connects everything together inside the JavaScript OnLoad event. Alright, now let's move on to the before a record added event. This is where I'll decide whether to return true or false depending on whether the field values are valid. And this is where things start to get interesting. The first step is to extract all the values from the session variable we created earlier. Here's how I'm doing it. I pull out the minimum value, the maximum value, the field name and the table name, and then I store each of them in their own variables. Now technically this step isn't absolutely necessary. You could just work directly with the array itself, but for clarity and honestly to help me understand what's going on more easily, I prefer to break them out into single variables. It just makes the code easier to follow. Once that is done, the next step is to call a function that I wrote called isValueInRange. This function checks whether the value entered into the field falls within the range we've defined, for example, between 10 and 20. If the value is valid, the function will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. In just a moment, I'll share the code for the function so you can see exactly how it works. Okay, so here's what's happening. I'm passing the table name into this function, and I'm also passing the field name we're working with along with the value. That's our $value variable. Now think about this for a second. Normally, when we want to access a field value, we'd write something like this: values and then the field name. That's the standard way to use it, by specifying actual field names directly. But in our case, we don't need to hardcode the field name. Remember, we already stored the field name earlier in the field name variable. That means I can simply use values and then the $field name as a replacement for the actual field name. This gives you more flexibility because if we ever want to change the field name later, we don't have to rewrite the code everywhere. It's already dynamic. So that's the idea here. The minimum value and the maximum value are also being passed in, and we already know where those are coming from. Alright, let's continue. Now in the after application initialize event, I'm going to create my function. Give me a moment here. I'm just pasting it in because I've already tested this and I know exactly what I want to do. But I also want to take a minute to explain it. So this is my function inside the after application initialized event. In this project, I only need one function. So I'll keep it simple and placing it right here. Now, if you are working on a larger project with many functions, say 20 or even hundreds, then the better approach is to create an external file, include it into your project and keep all your functions there. That way your code stays clean and manageable. For this example though, with just one function, I'm fine keeping it right here. Yes, I've done projects with 10 or 20 functions inside this event and it still works, but it does get big and messy. So for best practice, use external files if you expect a lot of functions. Alright, now let's break down what this function does. The function receives the table name and the field name. I'm using those because I want to create a proper field label. For that, I'm using the labels API from Xlinesoft, which you'll find in the manual. The API takes the table name and the field name and returns the correct label for the field. Next comes a simple if statement. Here's the logic. If the user's value, the actual number they type into the field, is greater than or equal to the minimum value, in this case 10, and the user's value is less than or equal to the maximum value, in this case 20, then the function will return an array with two values. True, meaning the input is valid, and an empty message since there's no error. But if the condition is not met, the function will return false, along with an error message that says the field label must be between minimum number and maximum number. So essentially, the function always returns an array, one element for the validation result, true or false, and the other for the message. Now, here is how I use the return value. Remember, it's an array. So I set the $message with whatever the array contains regarding the message, and I also then return whatever the function wants me to return, true or false. That means I don't have to hard code true or false here anymore. The function decides it for me. If the value is valid, it returns true. If it isn't, it returns false, and set the message. And that's it. Simple and clean. Alright, let's move on to the JavaScript OnLoad event. Here I'm going to pull everything I need from the proxy. Things like the minimum value, the maximum value, and the field name. For example, you'll see me reference proxy.fieldspinner.min and proxy.fieldspinner.max. For the field name, I'm using a selector where the ID starts with value underscore and then followed by the field name, which is currently in a variable, and that's the logic that ties it together. Next, I set the input type to number. That means I no longer have to check the number option in the page designer because I'm forcing it here with jQuery. After that, I apply the minimum and maximum attributes as well. And that's the JavaScript OnLoad event completed. So let's save the project and build it and view it in a browser. I close out the old tab, open products and add a new record. Here's the field. You can see it's using the spinner now. The minimum is 5 and the maximum is 18 because those were the values I set earlier. Let's change that. I'll update it to 10 and 23. Save, build and refresh. Now back at the browsers, if I try to go beyond 23, say 24, the message appears, unit in stock must be between 10 and 23 and the record isn't saved. Perfect. Now let's take it a step further. Instead of units in stock, I'll switch this over to reorder level. I'll set the minimum to 8 and the maximum to 17. Save, build and open a fresh browser tab. This time, units in stock is just a normal text field again, while reorder level has become the new spinner field. If I type in a value outside the range like 5, the message updates correctly. Reorder level must be between 18 and 70. Pretty cool, right? And here's one more thing to notice. Let's head back into the page designer and rename the field label. I change reorder level to reorder value. Save, build and open the browser again. Now when I add a product, the spinner is still working, but the message has updated to use the new label. For example, if I try 20, it now says reorder value must be between 8 and 17. And if I type something valid like 15, the record saves without a problem. So that's it. A really clean way to handle field validation with minimum and maximum values directly tied to the field names. Hopefully you find this helpful. There is another way to achieve the same result using a bit more JavaScript, and I'll work that out. Once I do, I'll go live again maybe tomorrow or the next day to show you that alternative method. Thanks so much for watching and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Now let's quickly check if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, let me see in the chat. Okay, somebody is saying that the audio is good. Thank you. That's always good to know. And any other questions perhaps? I'm going to wait a few seconds because I realized with the previous live stream when I switch everything off and I can see what happened in my control panel during the stream, somebody already was commenting and ask a question, and that chat didn't come through to me during the stream when I was online. So what I will do now is, and I apologize to that person, I can't remember who he was, he or she obviously, because sometimes the names is just I can't tell. But anyway, my apologies for that. And if there's anyone who wants to say something, and I missed it somehow in this because it's heavily delayed, please just leave your question in the normal chat afterwards as well, not only the live chat. Then I'll get it. I read each and every comment, and I reply to each and every one at this point. I really do. So thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate that. So I know I already said goodbye, but I probably will say goodbye again. So if there's nothing else, may you have a wonderful rest of your day for a second time. Till next time.